All right. Okay, we are live, it seems. How's everybody doing? I am I'm Ryan Frame. I am going to be talking today a little bit about making sense of our times, look into how astrology can kind of give us insights into the current crisis that's happening through COVID-19. And yeah, we can have a really interesting dialogue about the subject and about astrology in general throughout the course of this next hour segment. I'm going to be talking from like an elementary level in astrology, so no experience is really necessary. But I think if anybody does have questions, we can kind of leave it towards the end of the segment so that I can kind of go through my presentation with you and tell you a little bit about myself, and then we can really dive into it. So, as I mentioned, my name is Ryan. If you can hear from my accent, I am not from the United States, even though I live in Los Angeles. I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, and grew up there until I was 18 years old. And at that point, I moved to Cape Town, South Africa, where I went and studied and college there. I went on to work in the financial services industry for about a few weeks before I realized that that wasn't a career for me. And that's when I decided I was going to follow a career path as a film producer. And so I was doing that for several years in South Africa for about 3 years. And then I had a great opportunity to move to the United States in 2017 to do my master's degree in fine art, my MFA at UCLA in their film producers program. Was one of 10 people in that program. So I got a really, really niche, highly curated education in film producing. So that's kind of why Los Angeles is my home and that is my profession most of the time. I've basically been working on movies and TV shows and a lot of really interesting projects over the years. And subjects that really interest me are history and subjects about the zeitgeist and the spirit of our age. And because of those interests in history and in the zeitgeist, I've always been influenced by, how we can kind of learn from history, how we can predict like future events in a sense, or how do we get foresight into them. And so that's what really drew me into astrology, which I've been studying like for close to 2 years now, reading a lot of books on it, doing several courses, and looking at my daily transits, which I'll talk about in a minute, what are transits, and yeah, really just like diving into it. And of course, right now with the coronavirus that's crippling the planet, everyone's starting to like ask me, okay, well, what does astrology have to say about this? And there's a lot, and there's been these predictions for quite some time, because as we know, astrology is forward-looking because the movement of the planets are very predictable. So without further ado, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about astrology and why we look to it to help get like some insight and foresight into what's going to happen in the future. So I just want to put a little disclaimer out there. Astrology is not a like prescriptive, in a sense that this is exactly what's going to happen. The universe is deterministic and fateful. What astrology really speaks to is these set of potentials that exist in certain archetypes. And so for those of you that don't know what archetypes are, I really look into the study of astrology that I've really like honed in on is archetypal astrology, which works with the Carl Jung's theory on what are archetypes, which is the sense that there are these inherent, I'd say, types of energies that exist in the world, whether you see it manifest through human beings and people, whether you see it manifest through countries or places or certain dynamics and vibes in general. Those are different archetypical structures, and you have the planets which represent them as well. And so when people say, oh, Mercury governs communication, Jupiter is luck and expansion and abundance, where Saturn is restrictions and groundedness and, learning from mistakes and these certain characteristics of certain planets, that's the archetypal nature of these planets. And so over millennia, mankind has been looking to the stars to offer guidance on who we are and where we come from, and at the same time using those movements of the planets to measure the seasons, the harvest, and all of that. And so through thousands of years of measurement, we have gotten to the understanding that people that are born at certain times of the year exhibit certain qualities at certain times, and it can hone in all the way to the days, in fact, because so we have the 8 planets, if we include Pluto. We have those that are closest to the sun, that orbit the sun faster than the ones that are further away from the sun. And so their very fast movements affect the energies and vibrations that they're giving off on planet Earth, and influence people very differently to the outer planets, which are a lot slower in their revolutions and therefore have the effect over multiple years, if not generations. And so what's happening now with the coronavirus is very much an outer planet dynamic. So we're looking at Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune as well. But for the purposes of today's lecture, we're going to talk about Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. And Pluto, being the furthest one out there, is now classified as a dwarf planet, but it's not necessarily what is the classification that how it impacts us on planet Earth and humanity as a whole, but really about these bodies that are out in space, and their orbits are in a sense, if you think of it like a clock, for example. Yes, exactly, like Saturn's Return. I just see Justine wrote there. So if we use Saturn Return as an example, Saturn does an orbit every 28 years. So when people talk about one Saturn return, it's every 28 years a person will, Saturn was in the sky, for example. Right now, Saturn has just moved into Aquarius. I was born when Saturn was in Aquarius. I'm 27 years old. So by next year, our Saturn will be exactly where it was in Aquarius when I was born. And so it will be impacting me in a certain way. Everybody will experience their Saturn return. It's like a moment of that first quarter of one's life where you have a reflection of like, okay, this has all been the training ground for who I am in becoming a person. And so you have a Saturn return, you have a Jupiter return, you have a Mars return. Of course, Mars, Mercury, and Venus being the innermost planets, they orbit very fast, and you have those multiple returns every couple of years. But a Saturn return takes 28 years. A Pluto takes 84 years. For example, the United States is going through its Pluto return right now. The United States as a country, of course, can also go through, has its own birth chart. The United States was born on, of course, the 4th of July, 1776. So if you look at that, every 84 years, if you do the calculations, 2020 will be its Pluto return year. And Pluto, if we're talking about archetypes, is the planet that governs destruction and death and rebirth. And that's why we're going to see how Pluto really comes into the dynamic that really kicked off this coronavirus outbreak and this global pandemic. So when Pluto also, I should mention, governs democracy as well, and financial system, and it also governs viruses. So you can see how all of those elements are coming into play right now. You'll know that Pluto is responsible. So as I said, it's an 84-year orbit, and it moves through every single constellation 84 years. So it takes a very, very long time to come back into to do a full orbit of where it is in a current constellation. So we have 12 constellations, and Pluto moves every 84 years. So if we look at the last time Pluto was in the constellation of Capricorn, we're looking at the year. If we're looking the last time Pluto was in the same alignment as Saturn is right now, which is going to be significant. But I'll talk to you about different interactions between planets. That happened in the year 15, sometime in the 1500s, when we had the Protestant Reformation in Europe, which, for those of you that do not know, was a very time of massive upheaval for the Catholic Church, and where all different Christianity kind of splintered off into different areas. So what we're having right now, that began on the 12th of January 2020, was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Now, when people hear the terms conjunction, opposition, square, don't get a little afraid of what they mean. Essentially, what they mean is how, of course, we're speaking about planets on an individual level. What does Pluto represent? Like I said, it governs death and rebirth, viruses, democracies. Those elements are Pluto, but we can't just look at Pluto on its own. We've got to look at, how Pluto interacts with Saturn, Jupiter, and even the inner planets. But we're going to talk about, just for the purposes of today, Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter, because those are the ones that are really affecting long-term societal changes. And when speaking about opposition, conjunctions, squares, in fact, even trines and sextiles, these are just different ways that the planets interact with one another. And so when I mentioned the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s, that was when Saturn, Pluto went conjunction, which means in alignment. They both appeared to be in the same degree of, the same degree in every sign. Remember, I'm going to share my screen with you in a minute, and we're going to look at a chart, and I'm going to explain to you what the symbols mean and how a conjunction looks like. So I think I'm able to share it right now. Give me just a second while I do that. Okay, I don't believe I'm able to. It says I need to grant access to Skype. Okay, so wait, I need to quit Skype, and then I need to be dialed in so that I can share my screen. So Corey, would it be possible for you to call me back in, say, a minute, and then we can continue this? Is that possible? Can you just confirm with me on the chat? Okay, cool, great. So we'll be back in a second, folks. All right. So we're back, folks. Sorry about that. I just had to work out some technical things with my astrology. So if you can see now where my arrow is, I'm going to be showing you this is what we call the natal chart. Now, if I had to add all the different planets in astrology, we would see all these like interactions that are happening right now. I'm just going to take away this is basically, if we had to look at the date, let's put in today's date. We're looking at the 4/12/2020. Let's call that today. This is what the sky looks like right now. So you have all of these different symbols represent different planets. We have over here, that's the moon, which looks like a little moon. That is the sun. This is Neptune. Over here, this is Venus and Mars. This is Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto. That is, this was Mercury, and this is Venus over there. So, like I said, for the purposes of today, we're not going to look at all the inner planets. We're not going to look at the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. We're going to look at Jupiter. We're going to look at Saturn. We're not going to look at Uranus. We're not going to look at Neptune. We're going to see, look at this. You have Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn very close to one another. And so I'm going to take this chart a little bit back, and we're going to look at January 12th. And that's a significant day because each time I do this, this is a month. So if we look at January 13th, pretty much is the same thing, because remember, these outer planets move very, very slowly. We can see over here that Pluto is at 22 degrees, and this symbol here represents Capricorn. So they're in the constellation of Capricorn, and we can also see here that Saturn, 22 degrees Capricorn. So remember when I said a conjunction is when the two planets are in alignment in the sky. That essentially means that they are reinforcing their archetypes on part of one another. So remember when I said Pluto is about death and rebirth, and Saturn is about restrictions and laws, governance. It's really about taking stock of one's life, slowing down. And when you have a Saturn and Pluto conjunction that happened on January 12th this year, that's basically sets the tone for the rest of the year with the coronavirus coming. As we know, it really began in December, so not very long before. If we look back a month, let's look at December 14th. Remember, the World Health Organization classified it as a pandemic, an epidemic in China on the 31st of December 2019. So we look here, they are pretty much right on top of each other again, 19 degrees 21. When two planets are within 3 degrees of one another, we call that their sphere of influence. So they're affecting each other very intensely. So over here, within 2 degrees, we pretty much show that the culprit of this was this interaction. Now I'm going to show you something very interesting if we go back in history and we see other times where these two planets were affecting one another through historical events. Remember I said Pluto impacts death, rebirth, democracy, financial system, and also war. Now, I'm going to take us back, remember, looking December 14, 2019 over here. Let's look at, if we go back by the years, let's look at the year 1914, which was the beginning of the First World War. Let's take this all the way back. And you can see as we're going around and round and round, you see blue lines and red lines, blue lines and red lines. And what those are is what I was speaking about, conjunctions, oppositions, squares. As you can see, there's a square over there. So that's when the planets are 90 degrees from one another in their orbits, which means they are affecting each other significantly, but not as much as they would be if they were in conjunction or opposition. So I'm going to take us all the way down to 1914, and we'll see where the beginning of the First World War, which was, I think in the month of August. So let's look here, April, June, July. Let's see. How about that? We're looking at 1914. We have over here Saturn, Pluto, right on top of each other again. If we also look at the Spanish flu pandemic, which happened in roundabout peaking in 1918, let's have a look there. So we'll move up by a year. 1916, 1917, 1918. We see over here that the Saturn had moved already out of the a conjunction, but we have Jupiter now very closely to Pluto, very closely related to Pluto. Now I'm going to show you the sky right now. Look at that, folks. You see how the Spanish flu outbreak in 1918 looks very, very similar to the pandemic that happened that's happening right now. I've actually need to just adjust this real quick here. If I take it back to 1918. Sorry, it did adjust, but we'll see how you have this relationship where the three planets that we're talking about that affect the generational impacts are going to be in a very similar alignment to what they were during the Spanish flu over there. Okay, so even though they may not be in the same constellations, you still have them very closely orbiting one another. If we look at another date, the beginning of the Second World War, which was sometime in 1939, we'll have a look and see how they are interacting, and we'll look at the chart only. I don't know why it keeps defaulting back till today's date. Let's see. I might have to edit it over here. Call it then. Let's call it 9. I'm going to show you something interesting now as well with 9/11. But let's look at 9/11, 1939. That was around about the time the First World War started. And so let's just look at there. We have over here, there's Pluto, and there is Saturn. And that over there is a square. So they've been impacting each other around the same time as well in the sky. Then we have another impact, another aspect between these two planets that I want to show you. If we look at 1982, for example, which was when there was another massive global recession before the 2008 recession, which I'll also show you. Have a look at that. We have Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter all very, very close to each other in the sky. So let's look at 9/11 because we were speaking about that a moment ago. We were looking at 2001, and let's look at the September, and we look over here. We have there Saturn and Pluto in opposition to one another. So remember what I said to you about conjunctions are where the planets are in alignment. And if we look at right now, we have Pluto. The outer wheel over here is today, and this inner wheel over there is that date, 11th of September 2001. So this is an opposition. As you can see, they're directly opposite one another, and over here they're right on top of one another. So that is a conjunction. So Saturn and Pluto don't fare well when they come very close to one another, and they cause these global wars, financial crashes, viruses, the Black Death, by the way, which was another massive plague that happened in the I think in the 1500s that devastated Europe. That was also during a time of Saturn, Pluto, an aspect with Saturn and Pluto. I believe that was also an opposition that we saw similar to 9/11. So these come around every 33 years where Saturn and Pluto meet one another, 33 to 35 years. But again, they move 33 years in every single sign. So for it to make a full rotation into Capricorn, where we see right now, that's, several hundred years. So the last time it happened where Pluto conjunct Saturn in Capricorn, that was during the Protestant Reformation. So basically, it does seem like all doom and gloom, but we've got to look at Jupiter now, which we haven't spoken about. So when we're speaking about Jupiter's archetype, I mentioned briefly earlier that Jupiter really governs luck, expansiveness, and good fortune as well. So having Jupiter right here, that it almost looks like a 4 if you look at Jupiter. Jupiter is now just conjunct Pluto. And Saturn is kind of already moved out of Capricorn, if you can see the symbols here, into Aquarius. So Saturn moved out of Capricorn, which it was there for about 2.5 years, into Aquarius on the 21st of March. So it's been out for about 2 weeks. And Saturn, just like most folks have heard of a Mercury retrograde, all planets have this retrograde quality to them, where what it means is it moves out of a sign and then it moves back into a sign. So if we have to look at, if we move month by month, you'll see the path for the next couple of months, because I'm going to speak about really from now until December for the next half of this lecture. We're going to look at how Jupiter and Saturn also form conjunctions, as well as Pluto, and then how they move back into signs and in and out of signs. And that might give us insight as astrologers when the virus is going to kind of peak, when it's going to subside, when we might be able to go out again, and when we'll be safe. So if we continue talking about the how Jupiter is now conjunct Pluto, Jupiter being the planet that governs expansiveness, it is a planet that we look to, and it brings a lot of luck and good fortune, but at the same time, it does expand a problem that might already exist. So that Saturn conjunct in Capricorn that happened on the 12th of January this year really unsurfaced this problem that was existing, which was an outbreak of a virus in China. And when Jupiter came in to Capricorn, which was also around a similar time, it really propagated that problem. And so Jupiter for the next, I'd say, several months is going to compound the problem, and that's what we're seeing right now. It's spreading around the world. We don't really know if we've seen the peak yet, but what will happen if we look at June? Let's only look at today's date. If we go here, edit, and we go to 4th, 12, 2020. So let's move month by month. So we're now in April 12, 2020. Let's look at what May 12 is going to say. We're seeing the Jupiter and Pluto are moving further away from each other. In May, they're going to have less of an alignment with one another, so they're not conjunct anymore. So Jupiter by May, we're going to start seeing a slowing down of the compounding of that virus. And by June, if we move a little bit further than June, we'll see that Saturn, which is now in Aquarius, will be moving, let's move a few days later, will be moving back into Capricorn over there. So when Saturn, I said, left Capricorn, which it's been there for 2.5 years, on the 21st of March, it moved out of a sign where it was, Capricorn is if we talk about that, every sign has an element. So earth, water, fire, and air. Capricorn, the element that governs it is earth. So as Saturn moved out of Capricorn into Aquarius, which governs air, that's when the virus became airborne. So that's why we haven't really seen the peak yet, because it's spreading really fast. It's an airborne virus. It is concerning for a lot of astrologers looking at this, because we don't really know, how much that can compound the problem. But when Saturn moves back into Capricorn, we might see a bit of respite around June, July as well. And then if we continue looking as the months go by, let's look at August, September, October. So let's look at September. We see over here that Jupiter and Pluto will Jupiter also goes retrograde, and that even though when we speak about retrograde, that means it's appearing in the sky that the planets are moving backwards. So the planets are orbiting round and round, but just because of the position that the Earth is sometimes relative to the planets, it might appear that the planets are moving backwards. And when a planet moves backwards, its energy is said to be retrograde, which means it doesn't have as much of a powerful impact on its effectiveness on how it's impacting humanity. So when Jupiter moves retrograde, that means that the expanse of the virus might also be easing quite a fair amount in June. And so that might give us respite. What could happen, though, is in September again, that's when these planets move direct, and that the virus might come back. So if one had to make like a prediction from what I just said, we're looking like how Jupiter and Saturn might, Jupiter and Pluto, their conjunction that's going to be happening, which happened already, the first one on the 4th of April, which, right now we're in the peak of this virus expansion. And then the other one is happening on the 12th of June. If we look at the exact dates, the period from now until 12th of June is going to be really, really difficult. And even though many countries still have these serious lockdowns, and there is some talk of easing the lockdown, we probably won't see life returning until like late May, early June, where we can start going outside. And I don't know if we can say like return to normal, but there will be like certainly a relaxation of these stay-at-home orders or lockdown orders or whatever every country is defining them as. But one mustn't be complacent during that time, because by September we're going to start having certain astrological aspects that are coming into play again that will kind of spread this virus, that could be a breeding ground for the virus spreading again. So any of that protection that Jupiter often brings in June, July, August, September, it's gonna station direct again, and it's going to kind of expand the problem that already exists. So when will it end? I think that's the question that a lot of people are already asking. Like, when will we really be past this for good? Well, if we continue going through the months and we look here, October, November, they're still very much close to one another. December, there we see how 24 degrees, 1 degree, and 2 degrees, they're starting to move away. And we see over here, if we look at Saturn, is at 1 degree in Aquarius, and Jupiter is at 2 degrees in Aquarius. I want to take us exactly to this date, which will be very significant. December 21st, 2020. Look at that. Jupiter and Saturn are both at 0 degrees in Aquarius. So that means they're going to form a conjunction. Now, this conjunction over here with Jupiter and Saturn is quite interesting, because as we spoke about, Saturn is this planet that really restricts us. That's why people often talk about, oh, their Saturn return, they feel so stuck, whether it's with their career, their relationship, they just don't know how to like move that energy. Jupiter, which I spoke about, is expansion, luck, opportunity, abundance. So Jupiter essentially is like what we call a benefic planet. It's beneficial, and Saturn is malefic, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. I don't want to go too into it, but essentially when you have Saturn, which is a planet of groundedness and not a lot of hope, and you have Jupiter, which is a planet of a lot of hope but not so much groundedness, when they meet, you get this very interesting balance. And so when we look forward towards December, we're going to be seeing probably the time where we're going to have balance and equilibrium start appearing again in the planet. And what's really beautiful about this particular aspect with Jupiter and Saturn is that they are they come around every 13 years where they're conjunct. Again, there's always other aspects forming oppositions, trines, squares, but a conjunction happens every 13 years. And like I said earlier, that alignment makes it enhances both of their qualities. And so that balance, I think, might provide us with a lot of wisdom and insight that we kind of learned from the entire years, like chaos, and will empower us and enable mankind to kind of like restructure our society for a lot more, I'd say, egalitarian, equal, and a lot more, let's say, sustainable way that we can kind of restructure our systems, our economy, our societal makeup of how we gather, how we form community, and how we often interact with one another. And I think what this virus can really teach us, isn't it like, almost, I would say, poetic, that the universe gives us these types of harsh reminders at a time when we're very divided within the United States, of course, and around the world, with governments deciding they want to isolate, this idea of like resurgence of nationalism. This virus doesn't discriminate whether it's a country, gender, race, whatever. It's basically mankind's problem. And so how mankind decides to approach this problem over the next year, we're going to be looking to form basically a new system that will work for the vast majority of people. So what I think is quite interesting about this particular situation we're in is we're calling it a crisis, but often they say, in crisis there is opportunity, and there really is an incredible opportunity. We haven't seen a crisis like this really happen. The last time Pluto and Saturn had such an interaction was in recent memory was around 9/11, where they formed an opposition. Now they're recently formed a conjunction, which is probably worse. And as we know, this is way, let's say, worse than what 9/11 occurred. But look at the change, how 9/11 really changed the world, and this is going to change the world. The question is, do we undergo the discipline to transform in a positive way? And those that do will come out stronger, and those that are shown to be stuck in an old paradigm are really going to be left behind in this new world that we're creating. What's very interesting about how a virus doesn't discriminate, and how it doesn't how it's going to really shaping the current political agendas of the world. When we look at the sign of Aquarius that I just explained to you, how Saturn moved out of Capricorn into Aquarius on the 21st of March. Aquarius governs like the air sign, yeah, but it also relates to the archetype of community as well. And so really it talks about community, and another one it also talks about is innovation. So we're going to start seeing a lot of innovation coming up over this period. We're going to see a lot of communities start gathering together, and a lot of cross-border collaboration on the innovation side. So that is a positive outcome that is happening. But remember, Saturn starts going retrograde around June, and it moves back into, not June, in September, and it moves back into Capricorn. So maybe a lot of that collaboration, cross-border collaboration that's working to find a vaccine or to find solutions to the problem, might kind of fall apart. So we do have a very turbulent year ahead, but in the long term, just like the universe doesn't discriminate between good or bad, like when we speak about Saturn, these things bad, sometimes restrictions, and Saturn also works with timing. So I don't know if anyone can really like relate to the fact that sometimes in one's life you might feel out of sorts with timing. Things are just not going your way. 50-50 decisions are falling on the other side. That's all the influence of how Saturn is affecting your personal chart at that given moment or that given period. Remember, Saturn stays in a sign for about 2.5 to 3 years. And so, the current dynamics around Saturn, when people think, oh, it's such a bad planet, it can't do any good. In the long term, it really prepares us for the changes that are about to happen. And so sometimes we need to slow down. Sometimes there is, again, I didn't want to talk about the other planets in today's lecture because we can go really down a rabbit hole. But if we look at what Uranus is doing right now, and that really talks about the environment as well, and how the environment is kind of getting a little bit of respite from the slowdown in pollution, slowdown of travel. Forgot to mention Saturn and Aquarius are both related to travel. So the travel restrictions we're seeing right now are very much a consequence of Saturn. And now that it just moved into Aquarius, we're going to see them continuing for quite a while. I wouldn't advise anyone doing any movements, even though no one's supposed to. I think right now we really should stay at home. The North Node, which is another aspect I'm going to quickly show you now before that I just put on the screen over there. That's in Cancer right now. The North Node is, I don't want to get down a rabbit hole, but that works with eclipses. Well, we'll talk about eclipses in a minute, actually. But eclipses are quite significant because they tend to speed up processes as well. And with the North Node, which affects, eclipses are related to the sun and the moon, being in Cancer, that's really the sign of the home. So everyone is having to really take stock of their life at home, their family dynamics as well. This is going to be bringing up a lot of stuff for people and families. So the North Node does move out of Cancer and into Gemini, which again is another air sign. So that is to be, considering, how the virus is spreading in the air. I just want to take it out for a moment. But yeah, we'll talk about eclipses, I think, which is quite significant because the date of there's a solar eclipse happening this year on the 14th of December. And I can show you what an eclipse looks like on the chart now if I actually put that date in. So if we look at the 14th of December 2020, and we need to put in the sun and the moon, and we see here that they're right on top of one another. And I think if we look at the 14th, let's just move by day. Yeah. Okay, well, because the moon and the sun move so fast, you see how fast they cross over one another. So it is the 14th of December. They are within 3 degrees of one another, so they are in what we call a conjunction. And so that when a sun and a moon conjunct, that is essentially what an eclipse is, because the alignment of the sun and the moon is what appears as an eclipse. So that's why you can think of the conjunction with Saturn and Pluto being an eclipse of Saturn and Pluto. Even though they're not so close and we can't see them, it's that energetic alignment that we're feeling. And so a solar eclipse that we're seeing on December 14th is very close to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that will be on December 23rd, which is over there that we saw earlier. So again, these planets move very, very slowly. So even if we look at December 14th, they are in 1 degree of one another, 28 degrees and 29 degrees. We can still say that they're conjunct. So we basically have a sun, moon, Jupiter, Saturn alignment. It's a very, very powerful day on that solar eclipse. And that is going to be what I believe to be the moment where everyone around the planet can breathe this collective sigh of relief and be like, okay, whew. So bear in mind when we're looking at that solar eclipse, and it may not be 100% I don't know, a lot of folks are here on the East Coast. You may not have uh, a full 100% total eclipse, but it doesn't matter if you can see the eclipse or not. It's happening. By the way, that eclipse is going to be seen and felt in Patagonia. As a total, you'll be able to see the 100% total eclipse. And there is an event, there are events that are being planned to coincide with it. My friend is organizing a big gathering over there. They were involved in the solar eclipse gathering that happened in the United States in 2017, for those of you that might remember. And why I want to show you why eclipses are significant, and the period between solar eclipses as well is significant, because if we go back to that date, that 2017 eclipse, which happened on the 21st of August, so 8/21, 2017. Where is that? Okay, there we are. We had a total solar eclipse, and it was in Leo. And if we look here, where we can take out Jupiter and Pluto just to see where, just to make it clear. Saturn, which was over here in Sagittarius, soon after moves into Capricorn. If we move September, October, about a month later, I know I'm just moving by the day, folks, I'm sorry, it is quite slow, but we'll see soon that Saturn moved out of Sagittarius. I should probably be going by month at this point. Okay, boom, there. So December. So look at that. December 21st, 2017, it changed signs. Let's just go back a day. There it's in Sagittarius, 29 degrees Sagittarius. And then there, 0 degrees Capricorn. And so Saturn's been in Capricorn pretty much from that solar eclipse of 2017 until the solar eclipse of 2020. So like I said, it stays in a sign for about 3 years, and it's really been affecting Capricorn over this time. Saturn is at home in Capricorn. That is maybe a subject we'll cover in a later lecture. What does it mean for a planet to be at home in a certain sign and to not be at home in other signs? And what does that mean? Saturn rules Capricorn. That's what we say when it's at home in that sign. So basically, it does its best work in Capricorn. In other words, it restricts things. It really reforms things. It puts in rules. So these 3 years, when it moved into Capricorn from the 21st of December 2017 until we're looking at the 21st of December 2020, when we have a solar eclipse in Aquarius, where Saturn's just moved out into, that's very significant. And so I want everyone to kind of I'd say take stock of that. We're going to have a very difficult year until December. We had in January that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which really kicked things off. That started a few weeks earlier. That was uncovered in Wuhan in China, where the WHO called an epidemic on the 31st of December 2019. And then we had Pluto and Jupiter go into conjunction on the 4th of April, another one coming in, I think, on the 12th of June, and then another one in September, where things are going to get difficult again from September until about November, December, where Saturn will move out and we'll see this clearing. I want to go back to that date, the 21st of December 2020, that we looked at earlier. So yeah, we see how these planets are now very much moving away from one another. There's a lot of space in between them. There is no, if you can see here, there's no red or blue, which means there's no interactions between one another. And so we'll be experiencing probably a couple of years of freedom. But then remember, there's other planets that can come into the equation like this, Pluto, Mars, Jupiter. And so even though we might have some respite from the really tumultuous planets in the outer solar system, like Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, there still might be, how individuals are affected over this time will obviously differ on a person-to-person basis. So I hope that I know I'm about to run out of time. I just want to see from my notes here if I put anything else in here that I wanted to talk about. We spoke about December. We did speak about eclipses. So yes, I think, that's pretty much like everything I wanted to cover in today's segment. I think maybe we can use these next couple of minutes just to answer some questions. If anyone has specific questions, then put them in the chat, and then I'll do my best to answer them. So let me have a look and see what we already have here. Do I have a YouTube channel? Okay, no, I do not. I'm going to be doing Stimulus. Stimulus TV will probably be my weekly segment, because what's great about it is you can make donations to the New York City COVID-19 Impact Relief Fund, and that's, I think, for me, a lot more a valuable use of my time to, like I said, I'm not a full-time astrologer, and this is part-time. I can really only dedicate like a 1 hour a week segment, and I think with Stimulus TV, what they're doing is a really great avenue for it. So the next question, let's have a look here. I should be a professor. Yeah, I've heard that before. I think in my my actual job as a movie producer, you really are one has to be a really effective storyteller, and so that's something that I do all the time. I'm pitching ideas. I'm having to like tell people a story and take them through a narrative, and essentially that's what I guess. If we look at history and astrology and archetypal relationships, that's essentially what it is. So next question, do you do natal charts? Yes, I can do natal charts, of course. With a natal chart, one needs to give their birthday and their birth time, and where they were born. If you can have those specific information, I can basically draw a chart like what we've been looking at right now. What we're looking at on these certain dates, we call these transits. So if one was born on December 21st, 2020 at, what's the time now, 9:44 a.m. GMT. Remember, a few hours doesn't really impact the outer planets, and that's what we've been looking at. It will affect the moon for sure, the sun, because suns moves every 24 hours, the moon's every 2 days. Those will be impacted. So it is very important for a natal chart when you get everyone's birth time to get an accurate reading. But if someone were to be born at 9:44 a.m. on the 21st of December 2020, that's what their natal chart will be like. So then if we look at their natal chart a year from that date, for example, and let's say a year and like 3 months, 3 years and 3 months, that's what the sky will look like. So, and if we look at then and now, we look at the chart, the natal chart, and we look at the transits of what the sky is doing and how they are affecting an individual's particular chart. And so what we looked at for the rest of the year are these transits. And so that's basically what how I can help look at a person's natal chart and how the transits are going to be affecting them over the year. So, sorry, Jackson, natal chart is basically the astrological blueprint of an individual. So what I was explaining earlier is like the astrology that's happening transiting the planet right now. The natal chart is like, okay, who am I, Ryan? This is my date I was born, and that's the what a natal chart is. So I believe that we've run out of time. I'm going to go back to not sharing the screen anymore, and I think that's it. I think we run out of time today, folks. I hope everyone enjoyed that segment that I just gave you. If you want to have any more questions and stuff, you can follow me on Instagram. My name is Ryan_Frame, and I'd love to chat more about astrology with you. Great. Cool. Thank you.